Two driving forces have always shaped agriculture. One is physical geography. Climate and landforms determine what crops can be grown and what animals can be raised in each region of the world. For example, coffee grows well only in low latitudes. And in North America, blueberries do well in Michigan, Washington, and Oregon, places just east of large bodies of water that also have periods of cold weather. The other force is economics, the workings of supply and demand that influence the competing use of the land. Whether consumers want to purchase peaches or plums influences what farmers will decide to grow. Plant and animal production are directly linked to the climate in which they exist. Despite human intervention, climate, soil types, and levels of precipitation still govern what types of crops will be grown and what types of animals will be raised. Climate always has and will continue to play a major role in determining what types of agriculture will take place throughout the world. Most of the Earth's land surface supports some type of agricultural activity. The few exceptions are the high latitudes around the North and South poles, and the high altitudes, the tops of mountains. The following chart summarizes the types of agriculture most commonly found in each type of climatic region. American geographer Derwent Winsley identified these 11 main agricultural regions in 1936. Climate influences what agricultural activities will take place. For example, animal herding takes place in drier climates such as the western United States, North Africa, and Southwest Asia. However, animal herding can greatly vary depending on economic factors. And pastoral nomadism, a form of subsistence agriculture practiced in the developing world, people traveled from place to place with their herds of domesticated animals. In contrast, in ranching, a form of commercial agriculture found in the developed world, livestock graze over large areas while their owners remain in the same place. However, technology can overcome climate. In the chilly climates of Iceland and Greenland, farmers can grow crops in greenhouses. The tomato market, once dominated by sunny states such as Florida and California, now includes the products of large Canadian indoor growing facilities. Cultural preferences also shape economic activity. Consider food preferences. The climate of Southwest Asia is fine for raising hogs. However, in a region dominated by Muslims and Jews, most people have religious objection to eating or raising hogs, so farmers choose to raise other animals. Crops and livestock thrive best in specific types of bioclimates, so each bioclimatic zone is home to different types of agriculture. As previously stated, pastoral nomadism is practiced in arid and semi-arid climates throughout the world. Nomads rely on the animals for survival. Animals such as cattle, camels, reindeer, goats, yaks, sheep, and horses provide meat and sometimes milk for food and hides for clothing and shelter. Pastoral nomads move their herds to different pastures within their territory and often trade meat for crops with nearby subsistence crop farmers. Nomads in different regions rely upon different animals, depending on their culture and the climate in which they live. In South Central Asia and East Asia, they raise cattle because they adapt to the hot climate. In desert regions of the Middle East, they raise camels because they can survive without water for long periods. And in northern Siberia, they raise reindeer because they can thrive in cold weather. Subsistence agriculture, in which farmers usually in tropical climate regions move from one field to another, is called shifting cultivation. It is also known as slash and burn agriculture and as swidden agriculture because farmers sometimes clear the land by burning vegetation, a process that enriches nutrient-poor soil by adding nitrogen to it. On the cleared land, they plant and harvest crops until the soil becomes less fertile. Then the people move to another area of dense wild vegetation and repeat the process. Unlike crop rotation, in which farmers change which crops are grown within a field, shifting cultivation involves using entirely new fields. Farmers using shifting cultivation grow crops such as rice in Southeast Asia, maize in South America, and millet and sorghum in sub-Saharan Africa. Most families grow their own food for their own consumption, so one field will yield a variety of crops. Ownership of the land usually belongs to the community or the village as a whole. One of the legacies of colonialism was the replacement of subsistence farming with commercial agriculture in many less developed regions. A plantation is a large commercial farm that specializes in one crop, usually found in low latitudes and in hot, humid climates with substantial precipitation. Plantations are typically labor intensive and often exploit the cheap labor available in nearby villages and towns. In order to reduce the cost of transporting bulky crops, some of the processing occurs near the plantation. The valuable portion of the crop is then transported to the global markets. Common plantation crops include coffee, cocoa, rubber, sugarcane, bananas, tobacco, tea, coconuts, and cotton. Mixed crop and livestock farming is an integrated system common in the developed regions, such as the Midwest United States, Northern Europe, and Canada, but it also has diffused to many parts of the developing world. On these farms, the majority of the crops raised are fed directly to livestock. The livestock is fattened on the grains for eventual slaughter, or the grains are fed to dairy cows. The animal's manure is then turned to use it to help fertilize the crops. The owners of the land and livestock may be different people, but what is important is the interrelationship among them. The most common grains used for these purposes in the United States are corn and soybeans. Each can be used for animal feed, processed into oil, or used to make other products. In regions too dry for mixed crop agriculture, farmers often raise wheat. Consumed mostly by people, wheat is produced in the prairies and plains. China, India, and Russia are the world's top wheat producers, with the United States fourth. The type of wheat grown reflects the climate. Spring wheat is planted in early spring and harvested in early autumn. It is grown in a colder region that includes places like North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and the prairie provinces of Canada. Winter wheat is planted in the fall and harvested in early summer. It is grown in a warmer region that includes Kansas, Oklahoma, and Colorado. Traditionally, dairies and creameries were local farm and business supplying dairy products to consumers in a small geographic area. This pattern still exists in many less developed regions of the world. However, during the latter part of the 20th century, improvements in refrigeration and transportation expanded the milk shed, the geographic distance that milk is delivered. Large corporate dairy operations replaced smaller family-owned farms, which has resulted in a decrease in the number of farms but an increase in dairy production. Most commercial dairy farms are located in the United States, Canada, Europe, and other highly developed countries near urban centers and transportation corridors. In a few countries, demand for dairy products increased faster than the pressure for consolidation. So in Argentina and Brazil, as the economy developed and average incomes increased, the number of dairy farms also went up. Mediterranean agriculture is practiced in regions with hot, dry summers, mild winters, narrow valleys, and often some type of irrigation system. Some of these regions are Southern Europe, Northern Africa, Southwest Africa, Southwestern Asia, Southwestern Australia, California, and Central Chile. Common crops grown in Mediterranean agriculture include figs, dates, olives, and grapes. Herders in these regions often practice transhumance, the seasonal herding of animals from higher elevations in the summer to lower elevations and valleys in the winter. Because the regions have rugged terrain, goats and sheep are the principal livestock. Livestock ranching is a commercial grazing of animals confined to a specific space. Similar to pastoral nomadism, livestock ranching is found in areas that are too dry for growing crops in large quantities. Ranching is a prevalent agricultural activity in the western United States, the Pampas of Argentina, southern Brazil and Uruguay, parts of Spain and Portugal, China, and Central Australia. Among the many factors that influence the decisions farmers make about how to farm are the relative cost of land, labor, and capital. Because of these different costs, farmers balance the use of these resources differently. If land is plentiful and costs little, they use it extensively. If land is scarce or expensive, they use it intensively. Agriculture that uses fewer inputs of capital and paid labor relative to the amount of space being used is extensive farming. It includes practices such as shifting cultivation, nomadic herding, and ranching. Agriculture that involves greater inputs of capital and paid labor relative to the space being used is intensive farming. Intensive practices are used in various regions and conditions. Paddy rice farming in South, Southeast, and East Asia is very labor intensive. However, the nature of the fields, often on terraces, can make using machinery difficult. Market gardening in California, Texas, and Florida are near large cities and sometimes capital intensive, but it is nearly always labor intensive. Many vegetable and fruit farms use large number of migrant workers to tend and harvest crops. These workers are traditionally paid low wages. Large scale of intensive agriculture occurs on plantations and low latitudes. One technique to maximize output on a small amount of land is double cropping, the planting and harvesting on the same parcel of land twice per year. Another technique, intercropping, also known as multicropping, is when farmers grow two or more crops simultaneously on the same field. For example, a farmer might plant one crop alongside another crop in order to add nitrogen to the soil and guard against soil erosion. Extensive and intensive farming methods can be used for either subsistence or commercial purposes. The following chart shows how these methods and purposes can mix. That traditionally relied on extensive agricultural techniques are under pressure from local increases in demand, regional population growth, and global competition to use land more intensely. These demographic and economic forces place more stress on the land because they push farmers to use the land continually rather than letting it lie fallow and recover. Those who rely on shifting cultivation find it more difficult to practice these methods as global demand for tropical cash crops such as coffee, tea, and cacao compete for more land use. The timber industry has also put an economic strain on shifting cultivation. For subsistence farmers, the competition for space to grow timber, rubber, or products that are not even eaten, coupled with increased population, have resulted in food security issues, most notably on the continent of Africa. Some agricultural products combine extensive and intensive phases. Raising cattle in Wyoming is an example of extensive farming. The cattle roam and feed on grass in large ranches that average nearly 6 square miles in size. As the cattle reach maturity, the intensive phase begins. Farmers transport the cattle to feedlots, known as concentrated animal feeding operations in northern Colorado. The density of animals is high, and the cattle are fed corn and water in order to fatten them up right before processing into meat for the market. The global expansion of fast food operations, along with increased demand for meat, has led to larger ranching operations not only in the United States, but in South America as well. In the United States, the competition for space, animal size, and raising time have led to the creation of feedlots, which are confined spaces in which cattle and hogs have limited movement. Because of their reduced movement, animals gain weight faster and require less room. The economic structure of livestock ranching has changed in the past few decades. The increased demand for beef, poultry, and pork has created factory farms and processing centers. Cattle are less likely to graze on large expanses of land, but instead are raised in feedlots or CAFOs. The animals can grow bigger in a shorter period of time. This new practice minimizes the use of space and prepares the animal for slaughter quickly, thus maximizing profit. Agribusiness is the integration of various steps of production in the food processing industry. It not only includes large-scale commercial agriculture, but also the steps of processing and production, transportation, marketing, retail, and research and development. Given the enormity of this system, agribusiness operations are performed by transnational corporations. These large-scale operations are commercial, highly mechanized, and much of the raising of crops and animals involve chemicals and biotechnology. The following chart compares farming at the scale of a homeowner and an agribusiness. Globalization has accelerated the growth of agribusiness during the latter half of the 20th century. Competition in agricultural products and services has encouraged large-scale farming operations, thus eliminating many small operations. Many family-owned and operated farms are corporations far larger than the farms of the past. This system of resources, producer transportation, communication, information, and consumer is referred to as a supply chain or a commodity chain. Often these supply chain businesses are owned by one corporation. Vertical integration is when a company owns several smaller businesses involved in different steps in developing a product. A vertically integrated agribusiness might include one company that contracts with farmers to raise the crop, a trucking firm that transports the crop, a factory that processes it, and a wholesaler that distributes it to the stores. This gives the company control over most of the product development process. Large-scale farming usually practices monoculture, which is the raising of a single cash crop on large plots of land. Family farmers in developed countries and subsistence farmers in developing countries cannot compete with large-scale farming operations because large-scale farming produces food at a cheaper per unit cost. Many projects funded by the World Bank have encouraged agribusiness ventures in the developing world, often at the expense of subsistence farmers. As a consequence of globalization and the Green Revolution, many subsistence farmers have lost available land and now work for agribusiness enterprises. A suitcase farm is one in which no one lives on the farm and the harvesting and planting is performed by farmers who live nearby or by migratory workers. These are common in the Midwest and Great Plains in the United States. The transformation of agriculture into a large-scale agribusiness entity has resulted in a complex system of connecting producers and consumers at a global scale. This complex and enormous system enables someone who lives in a small American town to consume bananas from Ecuador, coffee from Brazil, chocolate from Switzerland, and an apple from Honduras. This transformation may be attributed to advancements in biotechnology, mechanization, transportation, and food preservation. A commodity chain is a process used by corporations to gather resources and transform them into goods and then transport them to consumers. This visual illustrates a simplified commodity chain for corn. Because of improvements in agricultural technology, advancements in transportation, and an increasingly globalized economy, farmers can raise crops and animals far from their final market, and consumers can still purchase the final products at low prices. Corn has numerous uses, such as livestock feed, sweetener, or fuel, and the commodity chain for each use would be more specialized and complex than the one shown. One farmer fed an average of 26 people. By the early 21st century, one farmer fed an average of 150 people. This improvement is attributed to technological advancements in transportation, fertilizers, and harvesting equipment, and a deeper understanding of the science of plants and animals. Advances in refrigeration created cool chains, which are transport networks that keep food cool throughout a trip. Fruits and vegetables from the tropics can be delivered fresh to the temperate climates of North America and Europe at a relatively low price for consumers. Intensive use of fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides over large lots of land has increased production. This mass production of agricultural products has accounted for higher crop yields. Whether it is a wheat field in Kansas or a banana plantation in Ecuador, large-scale agriculture would not be possible without these advancements in technology. However, the combination of more intensive land use, increased application of chemicals, and reduced amount of time for land to recover has led to environmental damage. The loss of wetlands and large tracts of rainforest cleared to increase farmable land have led to the loss of biodiversity and water resources. Petroleum-based fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides have caused soil, water, and air pollution and threatened the ecosystem. The globalization of agriculture has created more interdependence or connections among the regions of the world. Developed countries such as the United States and ones in Europe rely on producers in Mexico, Chile, and elsewhere in warm climates or the southern hemisphere to provide them with fresh fruits and vegetables year-round. Food production and consumption are a part of a complex global supply chain. For example, nearly half of U.S.-grown soybeans are exported. Major purchasers of U.S. agricultural products include China, Mexico, and Europe. Low-latitude countries with tropical climates produce products such as coffee, tea, bananas, pineapples, and cocoa that cannot be grown in mid-latitude countries. But the mid-latitudes include developed countries in Europe and North America that provide a large market for these products. These tropical foods are examples of luxury crops, ones not essential to human survival, but that have a high profit margin. For example, The cocoa bean is too bitter to be consumed in its raw form. It is highly processed in several stages, beginning in the country where it's harvested and ending in the developed country where it is commonly processed into chocolate. The globalized commodity chain provides wealthy consumers with wide choices. However, it can lead to problems in developing countries. For example, farmers who are producing crops might not be able to afford to consume what they produce. By focusing on crop exports, the supply of locally grown food decreases, which drives up the cost for local consumers. Think about the farmer from Honduras who grows chili peppers for the global market. He is not growing corn, beans, and other crops dominant in the diet. Finally, production might not be sustainable. Farmers might choose to follow practices that erode the soil or cause chemical pollution that harms the long-term use of the land. The efficient exchange of food around the world depends on effective political systems, strong infrastructure, and supportive trade policies. These conditions have evolved over time to make agricultural trade vital in most countries. Many connections that exist between Europe and the developing world were established through colonization. Although there are very few colonies in the world today, the economic relationships between developed countries and developing countries resemble certain aspects of colonialism. Neocolonialism, the use of economic, political, and social pressures to control former colonies, can be one way to describe the current state of global food distribution. For example, while the extraction and processing of cocoa is expensive, the profit margin in selling chocolate is very high. Most of the revenue generated from chocolate remains with the transnational corporations based in the wealthy country, while very little revenue finds its way back to the cocoa growers. In recent years, many consumers have become more aware of the disparity between high incomes of those in developed countries who manage trade and the low incomes of the producers in the developing world. One result of this awareness is the fair trade movement, an effort to promote higher incomes for producers and far more sustainable farming practices. Fair trade agreements between retailers and producers have been reached for several crops grown in the developing world, including coffee and cotton. While these agreements often increase the price for consumers slightly, they provide a bigger share of the revenue to producers and growers in the developing world. Governments in the developed world provide subsidies or public support to farms to ensure that consumers have a dependable, low-cost supply of food. The subsidies are designed to achieve three goals: to protect national security by ensuring a dependable food supply, to help farmers by increasing agricultural exports, and to help consumers by reducing food costs. Many agricultural products, such as grain or meat, are bulky to transport. Hence, one of the key components in determining the cost of the consumer products made from them is infrastructure that serves the countries where they are produced. The U.S. government subsidizes the exports of corn and soybeans and other agricultural products from the Midwest by spending money to make the Mississippi River passable for barge traffic. Because water transportation is inexpensive compared to land travel, these products enter the global food supply chain with a lower price than they would have without the government support. Because of these subsidies, consumers in Mexico City can purchase corn more cheaply from the United States than from parts of rural Mexico. Infrastructure improvements in developing countries connect resources to ports so goods can be exported. Often, other infrastructure in the country is lacking. As the map of the West African country Ghana shows, the major rail lines in the country connect the interior, where the resources are located, to the ports where they can be exported to the developed world.